one time I was dealing with something at a pharmaceutical company, and I was dealing with a really bad boss who was having an affair with her boss, which was my big boss, and it was really ugly. And I was smart enough to document and capture things. And I remember the big HR person came from corporate to talk to me, and like it was very clear she was not looking out for me. Is HR, human resources, as bad as you think it is? Probably it is. Hello, this is Michael Denisoff. I've dedicated my entire professional career to helping organizations be great, be highly successful, and have robust and fantastic cultures. And this is a Work Trauma, How Corporations Really Work podcast. On today's episode, we're talking about HR, why we still hate HR. So it's going to be the truth about HR. Now, listen, this is a tough one for me because early in my career, I was in HR. I wanted to be in HR, but I am a recovering HR professional for sure. I went into HR because I thought a couple things. One, I wanted that whole view of the company because I wanted to kind of help the company and the relationships across company, how it worked. Most companies will tell you, although they don't always mean it, but most companies will tell you that the most important asset is their people. So I wanted to be a part of the most important asset, which is working with the people. I wanted to work with the interstitial relationships, which is how not only the teams worked well together, how it was cross the teams. And that was very exciting to me because I have a very much a holistic system thinking mind. So it made a lot of sense to go into HR, and I thought I could go in there and make a huge difference. But the reality is it was not fun. It was not fun for me for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about. Part of it, a lot of the people in there just weren't very good, particularly not very good at business. Maybe good people, but just not very good at business and thinking big and working with executives. So it was very frustrating. So I got out. Anyway, but I know a lot about HR, more than I like to know sometimes. So I don't want to bash human resources because there are a lot of great HR practitioners out there, but they are few and far between. But if you're a great HR practitioner, you're worth your weight in gold. But the problem is there's very few of them. Now, remember, I'm talking mostly about large corporations. HR that I see in these smaller corp companies, mid-sized companies, they're actually really good because they have to be a part of the business in a unique way. They're just naturally intimate with the business, so they make a bigger difference. But I'm talking about these big companies, Fortune 500 companies. Their HR is not great. And most people feel that way. It's actually painful to me because HR could be adding so much value to corporations. All right. So let's start. Let's go back to August 2005. Fast Company magazine has this legendary article comes out. The seminal article comes out about Fast Company called "Why We Hate HR." And it was a big deal. And it was like a lot of people were feeling that way. People in HR were feeling that way, and it comes out. And here's the fast track of the conclusion of that article. 2005, it's 2024 now, so 19 years later, HR hasn't changed at all, that much, maybe even gotten worse. But if you look through that article, here's some highlights to the article, and it's kind of infuriating because they haven't really changed. One is, and this is straight from the article, this is not even my words, HR people aren't the sharpest tacks in the box. I didn't say that. They said this, the author said this in 2005, but I kind of agree with them, right? Too many social workers in HR, right? HR pursues efficiency in lieu of value. How many HR organizations with departments within companies really add value to the company? I'm not showing they do nice things or they do things efficiently. They really add value to the company. HR isn't working for you. Is HR really helping out the employees? HR is supposed to be the advocate for the employees, supposed to make things work better. Are they really doing that? The corner office, meaning the CEO, does not know what to do with HR, which is true after, again, almost 20 years later, and CEOs still don't know what HR is supposed to be doing in a lot of cases. And of course, they're not serving the business. Part of the reason they're not serving the business because they don't know the business. They've kind of isolated themselves away. Now, again, there are a lot of exceptions to this, but as a stage, HR is not great. All right. So nothing really has changed. So we have to ask why. Why has nothing changed that much after 19 years since this article in HR? Well, one reason is that we've kind of the HR paradigm has been the same. It has stayed the same. And although some of the people are no longer at CHROs, they've trained these current day CHROs, these head of human resources, and they're just not very good. They talk a good game, they use all this stuff, but they're just not very good. Not because they're bad people, although some are, not because they're not smart people, although some aren't that smart. A lot of them actually aren't that smart. It's because they're still working on the same old paradigm. So if you look through HR, we always talked about this evolution from personnel to human resources to people department to talent department and some fancier names. It's still putting sticker on something, and it's fundamentally the same. And I think it's really easy to argue that. It's just like with training departments in the early 2000s, they put a sticker on the training department window that said university, corporate university. Didn't make it a corporate university, just it's a training department with a new name. Same thing with HR. So kind of naming them something different or something exotic like people department or talent group doesn't make them necessarily better. All right. Two, like I said before, the HR could and should add huge value, but it doesn't because it kind of gets lost in itself. It kind of wallows and it's just terrible. Most CHR, I said this already, most CHROs not very good. They're generally weak leaders. They come some of the worst CHROs come off super polished, like they really know what they're doing, but their polish is just that it's external, right? It's not deep. They don't really have this deep knowledge, and they're very adept at the HR things. They're very adept at reading the CEO and what the CEO wants, but they're not really bringing great value to the business. And usually they don't have a lot of business acumen, right? We don't have people coming in with a big business acumen into HR. Usually people go to HR and they stay in HR, which is not good. It's not healthy for human resources in general. Also, like I said, a lot of these CHROs don't take the time to actually learn the business. They think they do, but they really don't know the business of the business. They don't spend time in the business. And their defense, a lot of times they're just doing HR stuff, which is fine, but you still have to do it. And yeah, so there's some challenges right now in HR. And then you add some of this progressive stuff that's going on. It doesn't help the business. It's just kind of more posturing than anything. All right. So why is HR so bad? Why do we just cringe our stomach? Matter of fact, before I went to tape this, I was talking to my mom and I told her the top subject. He's like, HR, I hate HR. I'm like, join the crowd. So we have to take an honest look. Why is HR so bad? Well, the first part of it is HR by nature is kind of bad, or it's kind of a tough department. Why? Well, HR has a lot to do with enforcing, interpreting, working with state and federal law. And if you know anything about the government, our laws are goofy sometimes, or they're arduous, or they're hard to understand, right? Or they seem very random and arbitrary, but you still have to do them. So whether it's around the A9, affirmative action, labor law, they get really convoluted, right? And you have to figure that out, and then you have to enforce them. So there's having I-9s in everybody's personnel folder, right, or HR folder. Does that add value to the business? No, but if you don't have them, you're going to get busted. So it's hard. It's the nature of it. So because you're dealing with that. I remember in the early 2000s, Sarbanes-Oxley came out post Enron to make sure there's less corruption in the business. Again, good. The law intent was good to kind of clamp down on corruption and fraud in businesses, but you really needed a whole other HR department to put it in place. And of course, they backed off on it. But again, not all these laws are great or brilliant for sure. Secondarily, right, by the nature of HR just being hard, is a lot of what HR does is kind of confidential, and it feels like things are in secrecy, and they should be. It is very appropriate, right? So there's a lot of things that are confidential that should be kept confidential and in secret. But it feels funny. It feels funny to the rest of the employees, right? A lot of times you'll go to a building, a workspace, and it'll be open space and cubbies and all this open space. And then this little box off on a separate floor will be HR because of the confidentiality of it. For just by nature, physically, there's an alienation with HR. And that's hard. It's just just naturally hard as well. Also, HR has got a funny dualism. HR, I would say, one of their most important jobs is to be advocates for the employees, to look out for the employees. But in the end, HR's most important job is to protect the company. It's really to protect the company. One time I was dealing with something at a pharmaceutical company, and I was dealing with a really bad boss who was having an affair with her boss, which was my big boss, and it was really ugly. And I was smart enough to document and capture things. And I remember the big HR person came from corporate to talk to me, and like it was very clear she was not looking out for me and what happened to me and why I was all upset about what was going on. She was about protecting the company, which, by the way, I understand that, but that's a weird duality to deal with if you're in HR. Next, HR generally, because of these policies and laws and legal things, they have to kind of police the company. Right? Nobody likes being policed in a company. All righty. Why else is it kind of just naturally difficult for HR? Well, when you're in HR, you kind of see the worst of humanity, right? You see things that people do, that employees do, and some of it's really rough. Some of it has to do with indiscretions, stealing, just awful, crazy things. I always like to think in HR, I heard it all, but you haven't. There's always something. Um, so I remember one company, I was number two in HR, and anytime something went down, the CHR would call me into his office and say, "Do you know this person?" And I knew it was coming next, which was this person did something, and what did I think of their character? So you kind of see the bad side of humanity in HR too, which kind of makes it a little wacky sometimes. Next, we've said this already, executive CEOs, they don't have a clear purpose of what they want their HR to be a lot of the time. The ones that do ensure that HR performs much better, but a lot of them, they just don't really want to deal with HR, right? It feels like a necessary evil within the company, or they themselves have bad PTSD, bad feelings about HR because they had, lived their whole career. So they already don't like HR because they've dealt with a lot of HR, idiocies, or they dealt with a lot of incompetent HR people. So they really don't want to touch HR that much. So that's another reason that's going on. Also, HR, when there's a reduction in force and layoffs or people get fired, HR is stepping forward and leading the way. So that's a tough reputation to have a little bit. And you know, also in HR, especially if it's a weak HR, you'll see executives override HR all the time. So HR will make a recommendation or say, "Man, we can't do this. This is potentially ethically wrong." And a SVP, a EVP, a CEO overrides them, and that kind of brings you down after a while, and also keeps you out of some of the high level conversations because they don't want to deal with HR and the moral police looking over them, although they should, right? Um, but yeah, so I mean that's a lot of natural things that makes HR kind of tough to work in, tough to like. It's just natural, but we know these things, so we should be able to architect and build or design an HR that overcomes them and adds value to the company. All right, why is HR terrible as well? Well, there's a lot of terrible people in HR. It just is. Okay, not all of them. I don't want to get letters, and I'm generally talking about the very large companies. A lot of them are just not very good, or they're 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 just they're not that great. They're not really cutting edge thinkers, right? And so I always wonder about with HR people. I know a lot of good people who went into HR, and I mean, is it kind of like, do they become this way because HR in general is like that, and you kind of Jungian, right? You adapt to the situation, or do you have people go in HR because they want to be that way? Probably a mixture of both, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for sure. There's a lot of people in HR that really aren't very good. Why is this the case? Well, and again, it's the current leadership. Make no mistake. What's wrong with HR? It's the current leadership and the most recent leadership because they're still, like I said, living in that old paradigm, right? And they're still kind of just looking out for themselves. And like all the executives around this idea I've been talking about protectionism and persevering or preserving their jobs. A lot of these HRs just kind of do what the CEO wants them to do to keep their job. And then the CEO ends up liking the CHRO because they'll do a lot of that dirty work, the stuff they don't want to deal with. And there's a lot of CHROs like, hey man, I keep getting this big paycheck and I'm running this department. That's fine. I'll keep doing your dirty work, no problem. So there's a reason why a lot of HR people feel powerless. Okay, it's because they've given up a lot of their power. They've ceded it. Um, yeah. So and they cede their power, and then they have their little components of power, right? And so this is where HR people get really bad. They feel um, impotent, and so when they get a chance to flex their muscle, they do it in a very punitive way. You see this a lot with things like sexual harassment. Like, oh yeah, you see HR team go, yeah, we got a sexual harassment thing. Let's go in and bust some heads. You're like, that's really not the approach you want to have with HR. And then, like I said, the biggest thing though is the HR people who run HR are still just kind of doing the same thing. They've introduced new terms. They think they're talking edgy stuff. They think they're using AI and new technology, but they really kind of have the same mindset. This became abundantly clear. And by the way, this was about 2004 when I was still in HR. And I kept on hearing about this thing. I was living in Southern California, this thing in LA, this new HR thing. It was going to be great HR, cutting edge HR. We're going to think about HR differently. We want to do the thing. We want to think at the table. We want to place table. And it was all this great. So I called a lot of my friends and we went up there and there was three, senior HR people kind of looked and talked the same and kind of were saying the same stuff. They were just mad because they weren't of the higher echelons yet, but they kept on saying the same stuff. And I'm like, I raised my hand and I talked to this one older gentleman who said, and I said, hey, this sounds like the same stuff. Don't you think we have to disrupt and do things differently? And he said to me very condescendingly, son, I've been doing this for 20 some years. I know more about HR and I know how to do it. I'm like, you know how to do it the bad way. And you're really good at doing HR the bad way, but didn't want to change, just didn't want to change, just want to kind of make their names for themselves. And so that's been passed on for sure. All right, let's just talk about HR. So in the or HR people in the HR why we hate HR article, it says it's not the sharpest tax in the box. There's some truth to that. How many people who are top in their MBA class go into HR, right? So good companies will make sure that all executives, plus particularly their high potentials, will have going through different departments, and HR should be one of them for sure. I think that helps out a lot. But the top people don't always go into HR. Some do. I like to think I know a lot of people who did. But man, one time I took over this team. I had this new HR team, a VP of HR, and I was new, so we took offsite retreat. We did some, team building stuff, some personality assessments, and then we went out of room and said, why are you in HR? And among the answers I got was this: I'm not good at math. What? That's not a good reason. Two, I like people. Well, I like people too, but if you like people, maybe you should be a social worker. And it was like answers like that until I got to who eventually became my number two, a brilliant HR practitioner. She said, I like to win. I like to do great work. I'm like, oh, that's going to be a high performing HR person. And she is. She is. She's doing great right now. So some of these people, it's just not good. It's just not good. It's just not good. Too many people. I think the word that always comes to mind when I think of HR is ninnies. They're kind of ninnies, man. They're kind of always mad. They're not being taken seriously, or people don't respect them enough. They have to do some of the cleanup work, and it's not powerful. It's not strong. All right, so we want to do that. And then companies, like I say, companies also just kind of have just a vision of what they want HR to be. So they're often second class citizens because they don't do the work of the work, right, or the work of the business. And unfortunately, a lot of the HR people live up to this ideal of being second class citizens. They live up to it. They don't change it. Now, one of the best things I've ever seen in my life was somebody who did change it. It was a new CHRO in this very large company, $10 billion company. And I happened to be there because I was just hired by him and I was helping out with something. And I happened to be in the room and they were going to start this executive meeting, right? The executive meeting of North America. And they looked at somebody to be the scribe for the flip chart and for the meeting. And this fella, who's a brilliant HR practitioner, looked around and was not going to move. And everybody kind of like looked at him. And he said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not a flip chart monkey. I'll do it in the future, but no, this is my first meeting. I need to pay attention. I'm not going to be the only one who does flip chart. And he set a whole new precedent with that team of how HR was going to be, how himself and HR was going to role, was going to be perceived at this company, which was brilliant. But most people would say, all right, give me the markers. I got scented markers. Look at me. I make funny little pictures when I draw. Yeah, a great HR practitioner. So that's where you think, wow, man, separate between really good HR and really not good HR for sure. So, like I said, a lot of HR folks, sometimes they're weak. Again, particularly in the large companies I'm talking about, they're not strong, which means they attract the same. They attract the same weak people, or if they aren't weak, they kind of turn the strong people into weak again, because that's how they do HR. Instead of saying, hey, HR should be this. All right. Okay, let's talk about people. I thought about this. I was on an HR team. I think we had all these archetypes. I want to talk about archetypes in HR. HR archetype people. And again, this comes out of the current conditions of how HR is run. But this is what I generally see. All right. Well, number one archetype I see, not a particular order, but number one I have listed is the wannabe. That's the person who's very polished, like I said, and they think they're really special and smart than everybody, and they're very keen, and they're very cutting too, and they talk a little slower, and they are always quick to put you in your place, no matter who you are, except the CEO and the executive team, of course, right? I've seen this a lot. There was this one lady I worked with. She was a CHRO of a brand, and she was studying neuroscience and coaching. So she thought, she was just smarter than everybody else, and it was her air that was smart. It was her air and her arrogance that made her seem smarter than everybody else, but she certainly was not smarter than everybody else. All right, number two. Profile or archetype in HR, kind of the angry and punitive person, right? This is the person that's like, I'm in HR, and you better fear me because when I come around, something bad's going to happen. See a lot of this as well. I saw this one time. A good friend of mine, who's now a best-selling author. He was a young fellow in this company, and his wife came to work, and she happened to be pregnant. And he was just so excited about it that he rubbed her belly, and everybody was just oohing and on. It was such an exciting and great moment that he was sharing with his coworkers, and it was awesome. And of course, somebody 10 cubicles down the road decided to report that to HR and tell HR how that made them feel uncomfortable when he rubbed his wife's pregnant belly. And then instead of saying the CHRO, instead of saying, get out of my office, that's stupid, said, oh yeah. And then brought this fella in and then dressed him down and said, I'm going to be watching you. You can't do stuff like that. You mess up this much, you're out of here. Right. And there's a lot of HR people who do that on the people they can, particularly people who are, fellow was at that time very junior. So somebody not as strong. So they kind of like flexing their muscle. All right. Number three, I've seen a lot of this too, the chameleon HR person. And this person has very little value or morals and ethics. And they'll just do whatever needs to be done. Whatever the CEO tells them to do, they'll just do it. I've seen them cover up DUI, sexual harassment for the CEO. They'll just do whatever they do. There's this one lady, they called her Big Red at the company. She was a VP of HR. And she said straight one time to me, I'll be a chameleon. I thought she meant like, I'll just adjust to any situation. She said, I'll be a chameleon. I'll be whatever and do whatever they want me to do. Like, that sounds great. Great way to live life. Okay. Not adding value, but being a bagman, that's pretty not good. All right. Also, there's kind of related to the ones above is the power hungry HR person, always with a chip on their shoulder, always looking again to flex their muscle, to show them that they have some power. There was this one woman. Can I say the company? Can I say some company, Robert? Yeah. Okay. The company was Cisco. They had an HR person there who kept a black book on her desk, and that was the people like that you would be on their her crap list. See, I'm trying not to swear, right? It would be her list. And if you were on that list, you were being watched. You were going to be in trouble. And she kept it open on her desk to send the message to the whole company that one, if you're on my list, I'm watching you. Two, you don't want to be on my list. So you better bow down to me. That, she would blacklist people and scare them because it made her feel important and good. All right. And then there's the holier than thou HR person who thinks they're the ethics, they're the Gandhi of the company, that they bring in their ethics and then that their words kind of mean something above even business. What I notice about these people are holier than thou. They generally, right, they kiss up and they kick down, right? Very, very unhappy people for sure. Number 6, better use of a term, archetype for HR person, a doofus, right? A doofus is, by the way, I have all names next to people. I can't share the names with you. That wouldn't be nice. But there was this one fella at that big company, and he knew his stuff. He was decent, but he's just goofy, man. And people just kind of saw him as a goof, and he kind of liked being a goof because he didn't think that much would be expected of him. People like this too. They'll get like certified in Myers-Briggs, and then their solution to everything is Myers-Briggs. We have a problem with this team. Give them Myers-Briggs. There's been a fight in the workroom. Give them Myers-Briggs. The building is on fire. Let's use Myers-Briggs. They're kind of doofuses. They're not very sophisticated people, but they're harmless and they do a decent job. So they tend to move along HR. Okay. All right. Next is kind of that nice HR person that just wants to be accepted and just wants to be acknowledged, right? And this generally, again, a good person knows their stuff, but no real edge. Will not really kind of stick up to anybody. Will get pushed around a lot, complain about it a lot when the powers that be aren't there. But just wants to please people. It's really a pleaser. Is probably the better word for it. They just want to please people, and then that's not a bad thing in itself. It is, right? If that's the only thing they want to do. You see a lot of HR people like that. And then the new one now, we start seeing, again, this progressive stuff, some of this interesting stuff that's entering HR that serves no real value to the business, but it feels like they're doing something important for the world. So that's kind of relatively new and not helping the world for sure. So what we know is one of the strands that is kind of common to these archetypes is they're generally weak people, right? They're weak of mind, they're weak of will, and people, in my experience, and I think this is pretty much accepted wisdom, people who are weak tend to be some of the cruelest people there are, right? Because they're just angry, they want retribution, they're tired of being pushed around, they have deep anger, right? HR people are kind of like that. HR people man, I went to some HR conferences, they were kind of weird people. They tell the dirtiest jokes. There's all this pent up stuff on them because they're kind of mad that they're not at the table, and that stuff. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see them. And then the ninth archetype we're going to talk in solutions is the good ones, a great HR practitioner, and there are some out there, like I said, and they are worth their weight in gold. There's no doubt about it. All right. Again, another reason why HR why he still hates HR. Two to this one, or three now, is HR still hasn't found its place, right? HR still doesn't know what it's supposed to be. And again, part of that is the executive expectation. So part of it not just HR's fault, part of it's the CEO and the executive team's fault, right? What do you want from HR? Again, a lot of these executives just necessary evil. You have to have them. They can do some cleanup work. They can do some of this people stuff that I want to deal with. It's just out there, right? And again, and most CEOs have bad taste in their mouth from dealing with previous bad HR performers. So that's what happens. And so that's a big part of it. And that's my frustration personally. It's HR could add tremendous value, but does not have the will to do it, and often not the intelligence to do that. So I could go on and on about this. Just so you guys know, too, I have a whole different thing. This thing could be 12 podcasts in itself. I have a whole different movement. It's called HR Rising, and it's about taking HR to where it needs to be. But to take somewhere where you need to be, you have to call it what it is right now, and that's what we're doing right here today. So these HRs, they don't have their place. They tend to be reactive. They jump into motion when there is a problem. It's just golly, they're not adding value like they can, and they should be. It's right there. People are the most important asset of the company. It's the people department, and still it's swinging and whiffing. But in the end, it's the leadership's fault for sure. All right, let's see what else we have here. All right, and lastly, this is a big one. A lot of HR just doesn't have business acumen. Just don't know how business really works, and they don't even understand the business of the business. Years ago when I was at Neutrogena, I could tell you all about the 7 layers of skin, about surfactants and skincare. I could tell you what a planogram looks like at Target or Walmart. Most HR people couldn't care less about that stuff. I'm like, well, we're serving the people who are working on this stuff. So you have to not only have the business acumen, but know the business that you're doing. And that's where HR becomes the most valuable. But, again, a lot of times this no real understanding of the business and sometimes no desire to do that. All right. So I railed a little bit on HR. So let me be clear. Generally talking about HR and the bigger companies and the large and the mega companies, all right? Because it becomes all the game. I mean, you see some of these CHROs that are either being recycled because they'll be hired again because they had the CHR title before, or that they're at these companies and they tend to be like really people. And you have like very few HR recruiters just kind of passing around the same people. It's kind of like coaching in the NBA. There's so many bad coaches in the NBA, but they kind of be recycled and kind of thrown around the league. You see a lot of that in HR. All right. So again, I could go on days and will go on days with HR Rising, that movement, but that's a good taste of it for you guys for here. And again, it's good for you to know how HR works. So you know what you can count on. Can you count on HR as an employee? Depends on your department. But at some point, that HR department will protect the company first. Okay. So what are your solutions? Well, again, I can't solve all the problems here on this thing, but I'll give you, 5 or so that I think are ways to improve HR. And then for more information, I would check out HR Rising, which is kind of this new thing I'm on for all the HR people that follow me. Oh, first of all, I mean, of all the things that need to be burned down and rebuilt in organizations, other than the executive prestige and protection movement, is HR. HR needs to be really hollowed out. It really does, because there's so much. When you look at the governing bodies of HR, like I don't want to say their names. You know who they are. One rhymes with perm, right? And the one has a bunch of letters. They're just not very good. They have good stuff. Don't get me wrong. But in terms of leadership, and changing and morphing HR, they're just not good. It's status quo. So HR needs to be totally dismantled and built up again, because HR people cannot get out of their own way to rebuild it. They've proven it for all these years. They can't do that. All right. Number 2, you know this already. Make sure your HR person, right? Whether you have an HR business partner or you're working with CHRO, make sure they learn the business of the business and business, right? Make sure they're connected to the business, not just doing HR stuff. That's really important. 2, hire really good HR talent at your company. Upgrade your HR talent. So you want somebody who's smart, duh, and strong, duh, and they're able to nail the basics, the price of admission stuff, as I call it. They get that. They can get that really easy. It shouldn't be that hard, right? Making sure people are paid. If you don't do it, they don't care about it. Employees don't care about anything else, but you should be able to get it paid, because we've been paying people for a long time in companies and there's new technology. So these basics should be done and done really, really well to free HR up for the higher things that need to be done. HR people should be talent focused, right? Unless there's a specialty involved. But even those people should have a sense for talent and the business of the business. And they should be, like I say, all executives, they should be business leaders first and then really great at HR. Okay. And I had a good mentor telling me all the time, the HR person should always be the healthiest person in the room. So think about that. If we really said, hey, we want the HR person to be the healthiest person in the room, think about the onus on that HR person for sure. Number 4, adapt a new paradigm of what HR is. It's got to decide its true purpose. Is it this transactional stuff, this traditional HR stuff, or is it about the people? Is it about the talent? If it's about the talent, you got to start doing things differently, including hiring an OD person or a talent person to be the head of HR, and the kind of traditional HR person kind of run the transactional stuff, right? Because a typical HR person really doesn't have a sense for OD or talent. And turn HR into something that's proactive, that's constantly thinking about how to add value to the business. Again, I had another great HR person tell me once that you're doing great HR when somebody calls you when there's not a problem. That's when you're doing great HR. And then lastly, make sure the CEO has a clear and really unapologetic view of what they want from HR. Just like they're going to have that same kind of expectation from finance or IT or marketing. So if you're a CEO out there, expect great things and tangible things and value-added things from HR. Wow. I could spend hours on it, and I will in HR Rising. Um, but this is a sense for you. So again, if you're in HR, you know what you're getting into in HR. If you're an employee, see HR for what it's supposed to. Really evaluate how good they are. Make sure you find the good HR people to work with, and most do, by the way. Most people kind of figure that out. And yeah, and that's generally how HR works in large corporations, and why they give us so much work trauma. Why we still hate them. So I had a good time with this one. Hope you did too. So this ends the workforce. I'm assuming work trauma, how companies really work episode. You have a good day, and we'll see you next time.